What's up guys, Antonio with Leader of the Pack Canine Training, and today we're going to talk about collars, or at least the collars that I use. Now there's no end or limit to how many collars there are out there in the world for you to use or choose for your dog, but today we're going to talk about some of the ones that I use and that I prefer whenever I'm working with the dog. So let's get started. So as you guys can see, I've got quite a few options here on the table. What I like to start with is going to be actually a slip leash. And I know this isn't a collar, but it kind of doubles as a collar and a leash in one. And one of the reasons why this is my go-to to start with is because it's the least invasive, in my opinion, of most of the training collars. And if I'm not quite sure how a dog is going to take to a particular collar, I'll start with this and use this as a means to control them in training. One of the things that I like about this collar, or leash rather, is that it has the ability to stay in place. Now, like I've mentioned in other videos, when we're properly fitting a collar, we want to make sure that it's fitted high up on the neck and fairly snug so that it doesn't slide down. And this leash takes care of that because it has this tab here. One of the things you want to look for when you're purchasing a slip leash is that this tab is actually slightly difficult to move along the leash, because the easier that it slides, the more likely that while this is on your dog, it's going to open up and kind of defeat the purpose of actually having it in the first place. So you definitely want to make sure that this is fairly snug. As you can see here, it won't come off, and a lot of people are concerned when they put a collar on their dog that the dog may be able to slip out of it. And your dog won't be able to slip out of the slip leash. So moving along, a slip collar is going to be my next option, especially when I want to have control over a dog throughout the day. A lot of my clients, when I recommend putting a leash on their dog throughout the day, don't really want to do that. And I can understand a lot of people have doggy doors, so the dog is going to go outside. Maybe the leash is going to run through poop or something like that. So I always recommend a slip collar. And literally this is the exact same thing as a slip leash. As you can see here, we have a tab that's pretty tight, right? So what I do like about this is, while this is on the dog, I usually have my clients get a slip collar that's a little bit longer than needed. And the reason for that is because this little end here, assuming that it was properly fitted on a dog like this end is actually going to double as a little handle. So when I'm working with a dog or instructing my clients to work with their dogs at home, if, for example, they ask their dog to go to their bed and they're not getting the response they're looking for, they can use this as a means to guide their dog and control them, as opposed to having to reach in and grab them by the collar, which I'm really not a fan of doing. The next collar on the list is going to be the martingale collar. Some of you guys may have seen these before. You may have also heard them referred to as a greyhound collar. And there are different options for these collars. For example, this one here doesn't actually have a buckle, so this is going to go over the dog's head, and then it'll actually need to be tightened in order to fit and be placed at the top of the neck and stay in place. I'm not really a fan of these just because of the fact that you have to go through a lot of work and it's difficult to try and make adjustments while it's on the dog. What I would rather use is one of these, and these are obviously different sizes. This one's a little bit thicker, this one's a little bit thinner, so I'd use this on a smaller dog. But this one has a buckle, so I can easily put it on and take it off the dog when needed. And what I also like about this is that it has this cinching mechanism here. And the purpose of this is actually to administer corrections and use pressure as a form of communication. So when it tightens up on a dog, it's sort of our way of communicating with them. I've worked with many dogs, and these collars can be very beneficial, especially if you are not comfortable using one of the other collars that we're going to talk about shortly. But at the very least, you'll have more control over your dog. This is a really great collar, and this is another great place to start as well if you want a little bit more control over your dog and you're intimidated by some of the other collars. The next one on the list actually would sort of be the next step up. And this is a chain slip, also known as a choke chain. It is fairly similar to this collar, but the main difference here is that there is nothing to hold it in place. And to be honest with you guys, I am not a fan of this collar at all. I actually just included it in this list because I wanted to talk about it and explain how, for example, with my dogs, they both actually have a form of a choke chain, but I use theirs as, for my Shepherd Brooklyn, it has her tag on it, and for my dog Logan, I actually like the way it looks on him because I think it sort of contrasts well with his yellow fur, and he's got a black tag choke chain on, and it's really about aesthetics for me at that point. I don't use it actually to work with him in any way. And honestly, if you guys are using this collar to work with your dog, I highly recommend that you get another collar. And one of the main reasons for that is because number one is that we have no control over the dog, or no added control over the dog, which is what a training collar is supposed to give us. So because this collar sits so low on the neck, we're actually damaging the trachea every time we push in on the neck or we pop the dog, for example. I'm really not a fan of this collar at all. If you're not using it for a tag, then I would recommend honestly throwing it away or donating it or just getting rid of it. The next one on the list is going to be this is called a Star Mark collar. Now I got two different sizes here. Obviously this is a little bit smaller and this is larger. Now this is a collar that I'll recommend to clients that aren't necessarily comfortable using the original Herm Sprenger collar, but they definitely need a little bit more control over their dogs. What I do like about this collar is that at least in public, for example, it's not as obvious that you're using a prong collar. So in a lot of cases, it makes a lot of people more comfortable. Plus the spikes here are going to be a little bit more blunted, so not as aggressive as a pinch collar. The one thing too about this is that it can be a little bit difficult to open and close. So, and that's something that once you make this adjustment though, and you know what size you need for your dog, that'll be it. You'll actually be putting it on and taking it off with the snap and the connection here. So again, just like all the other training collars, we want to make sure that it's properly fitted, high up on the neck, and nice and snug so it doesn't fall down. And just to give you guys a little insight here, the difference between, obviously, these collars, one's big and one's small, and this would obviously be a better fit on a smaller dog, but also the length of their hair is a big part of that as well. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the prong collars right here. So for these prong collars, I actually have three different kinds. The first one actually was one of the originals. So this is a Herm Sprenger, and this is the only brand of prong collar that I recommend using. It's German made. This is the original, and some of the ones that you may find in the pet stores are going to feel a lot cheaper. They tend to break, they tend to pop, and I've had a lot of complaints from clients that have purchased their own without knowing about this brand, and this is the common issue, is that they're sort of cheaply made, and in a lot of cases what happens with those collars is these prongs are shaved off. And so the edges of them become really, really sharp, and they create much more irritation for the dog. This particular brand polishes and smooths out the prongs so they're not so sharp and they're more rounded at the top. So this is the original collar. As you can see here, the only way to actually open and close this collar is by pinching the prongs together and then opening it up. Now, I do like this collar, but in my experience, I've had a lot of clients that have a very difficult time putting this collar on and taking it off of their dogs because it is sort of difficult to manage these prongs like this. So with that said, what I'll recommend is a quick release collar, and the difference mainly is this piece right here. So when you put it on and take it off your dog, it's much more easier for someone that may have arthritic hands or just doesn't have the strength to pinch those prongs. It's a lot easier to sort of put this on like a necklace. I usually tell my clients by sliding this through here and then and making this connection here, and then you have your prong collar. Another thing that I actually really like about this collar is with the old school Herm Sprenger and also the Star Mark collar, you can only make adjustments in 1-inch increments, right? So if you put it on your dog and it's too loose, then you take a prong out and it's way too tight, you're kind of stuck in the middle. With this collar, you can actually make smaller adjustments. So you can, for example, when you put it on your dog, if you realize that putting it on this link is maybe a little bit too loose, you can put it on the next link and make that a perfect fit. And that's one of the other things that I really like about this collar, not to mention the fact that it's super easy to take off. The other thing that I want to mention too is that there can be a little confusion between where you should actually connect these collars when you're putting the leash on. And the answer to that is you want to put it on this ring here. This is called the D ring. As you can see, it's sort of shaped like a D. In addition to that, it also swivels. So that's how you'll know you're putting it on the right part. The O-ring here is this is actually going to be touching your dog, and this is going to be the part that you put on the leash, or you attach the leash to. We also have our flat collar, and I actually took this collar off our dog Minnie just to give you guys an example. I don't really recommend these collars for training. These are more for name tags and identification purposes, but I wanted to throw them in the mix because I know a lot of you guys probably have one of these collars. You may have the collar that sort of looks like a belt where you have a buckle and whatnot, but that collar is more so for identification and not for training. And the reason for that is because, again, you want to have a collar that's going to be properly fitted, snug tight, high up on the neck, so that way you have control over your dog through training. So speaking of having control over your dog in training, I did mention earlier that I like this collar, especially for around the house for my clients, because they have the ability to grab on. Now, if you have a dog that actually needs a prong collar, then I definitely recommend having the ability to control the dog frequently throughout the day around the house, especially if you're working on things at home. And the way to get around having to put a leash on your dog and drag the leash through the house and run the risk of the leash getting caught on something and then the dog getting corrected for no reason, I highly recommend getting or making a tab leash. And a tab leash is really, really simple. Think of it as keeping tabs on your dog, right? So this is a tab leash. Now this leash I've cut because it was a little bit too long for my liking, but basically all it is a little fabric here connected to a snap, and this is referred to as a snap. And so essentially what you'll do is while your dog is wearing their collar, you want to put the tab leash on the dog. So as an example, if you ask your dog to sit and they don't sit and you want to help them out physically, or if they know what's expected of them and you want to give them that correction, you have a means to correct without having to fumble and get your fingers in the chains of the collar. So now we have a means to actually grab the dog without being too invasive and grabbing them by the neck or grabbing them by the collar. Now, if you can't find one online, because surprisingly they're a little bit difficult to come by, some of the tab leashes that you may find online are going to be like 10 inches long, 8 inches long. I found a couple that are 6, but they don't really have a handle. This one doesn't either. I don't mind that, but you may want one with a little handle. So with that said, this is something that you can make at home. It won't cost you more than a few dollars. This is a snap, like I said. So we've all seen these before. And this is actually a parachute cord or a little bit of nylon rope. I've made my own for clients in the past, and it's really, really simple. I mean, you can knot this through however you would like, but just to give you a quick example, this is something that you can do at home. Create a little knot, and then you can sort of knot this up at the end. Boom. Take a pair of scissors, cut this off, and now you've got a little tab leash that you can use to control your dog around the house. Again, whenever we're talking about using training collars, keep in mind that they should only be used when needed. So for example, I often tell my clients, if you're looking to control your dog frequently throughout the day and you're going to use a training collar, put it on in the morning and take it off at night. Definitely don't leave your dog unsupervised with one of these training collars, because in the event that they could get caught in something, we definitely don't want to hurt them. And in addition to that, never ever ever tether your dog to a prong collar or tether your dog while they're wearing a prong collar. We always want to keep safety first. I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more.